and welcome to the TIPBS podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gavin Krishnamurthy. I'm stepping in today for Dr. K.A. This episode is a strategy share. We're going to do a deep dive into nutrition, trauma, and learning and give you some practical strategies to support your students. There's been some recent interest in the topic of nutrition and education in the US and UK, particularly around the funding for the role of school lunches and the question about the veracity of the research into the role of school lunches in being able to support academic achievement and social emotional adjustment in school. So let's take a closer look at what the research is actually telling us about the role of eating in nutrition and learning and achievement. And we'll look at the implications for this in particular for traumatized students. So starting really broadly, looking at trends across the globe, there appears to be two broad trends when it comes to challenges regarding nutrition of children. On one hand, we have children in both developed and underdeveloped countries facing high rates of malnutrition, so they're just not getting enough to eat. And on the other hand, we also are encountering increased rates of childhood obesity. So children exposed to abuse and neglect are often vulnerable to both of these trends. So with families being unable to feed their children prior to school, while others feeding their children sporadically with sort of inexpensive and under-nutritious food. And this might then lead to kind of obesity and other health concerns. So it's, as we can sort of see here from a school's perspective, there are several students living in circumstances of neglect that arrive at school hungry. This is from a report by, a 2015 report by Salt and Mitchell into the prevalence of the role of hunger and malnutrition in educational achievement. The report identifies students of low socioeconomic families. A majority of students identify that they, from this background, identify that school lunches are their primary source of nutrition. So for some, this seems unbelievable, but unfortunately, this is the reality for several children as they arrive at school. So why does this happen? Why in this day and age, even in fairly affluent countries, that there continues to be such problems with malnutrition? We know intuitively from our own personal experience that it's hard to learn and concentrate and participate in school if you are hungry. But what exactly does the research tell us about the relation between nutrition and learning? And this graphic also kind of describes a little bit of the complex interrelationships between nutrition, social, economic factors, and health and education, really. So food preferences are affected by social and family factors, as it's kind of described in the picture there. So this could be things like the eating behavior of parents and peers, advertising, marketing, and practices related to food production and consumption. So while constraints of low income create practical barriers to healthy eating, so healthy food is often more expensive, additional socioeconomic factors like culture, lack of literacy, and education reinforce these sort of effects of deprivation. So it's clear that much of the groundwork in cultivating food preferences in children occurs outside of school. So it's early in life, before the start of school, and through parenting, advertising, and marketing. So there's been kind of several studies done to indicate, to kind of suggest this. So what we also know, taking a closer look at some of the implications for this, we see that there's sort of deficiencies across various kind of food groups with their nutrition, but it has implications for their physical, cognitive, and behavioral development, and then in turn their kind of achievement at school. So in summary, without kind of delving in too much into the research, there's a lot of specific research into the role of kind of glucose levels in assisting concentration levels, and how, there are irregular kind of glucose levels that then affects kind of cognitive functioning of students. There's, lots of research into nutritional deficiencies, into things like vitamin B12 deficiencies that affects cognitive performance and learning, as well as sort of fluctuations in motivation and concentration. So this is a quick summary from the Salt and Mitchell report about some of the implications of poor nutrition and on kids and learning. So in summary, what we know, that's quite a nice line there, hunger hurts kids. There are a whole host of problems facing students who arrive at school hungry, including a negative impact on their behavior, cognitive capacity, motivation, and relationships. So the next question, obviously, is, so how exactly does hunger and poor nutrition affect traumatized students? Is that any different, or is this the same? So let's take a closer look at that. So in this figure from a paper from Aparicio and colleagues, we see a summary of kind of three distinct pathways in which hunger and eating affects learning in kind of kids who've experienced trauma. So first, from a biological point of view, experiences of stress are associated with the release of hormones, a hormone called epinephrine, which is known as the adrenaline hormone. And what adrenaline does is that it triggers the body's fight or flight response. So a revved up physiological state that temporarily puts the eating on hold. So such hunger suppression can be observed in some children. So these kids might go without food for long periods of time and just not notice it. So for these children, the experience of hunger and the impact of poor nutrition, often it's not them coming and saying that they're hungry. It often gets expressed through their behavior or poor concentration or non-compliance and things like that. What we know for toxic levels of stress, if the stress persists, much like it does for kids who have been traumatized, it's often a different story. For these kids, the adrenal glands in the body release a hormone called cortisol, and cortisol sort of increases appetite, but may also ramp up motivation in general to kind of eat. So once a stressful episode's over, if cortisol levels were to kind of stay high, then this elevated level of cortisol may increase the intake of foods high in sugar or fat or both. So once ingested, these foods seem to have a feedback effect that inhibits parts of the brain that produce and process stress and related emotions. So it almost functions as a way to kind of help them manage their feelings of emotion. That's where we get the kind of idea of comfort eating or kind of stress eating, as some people may call it, to counteract that stress. So it's actually a biological pathway. So you see a lot of traumatized kids who kind of eat a lot or gorge themselves. From a psychological point of view as well, that it's a learned kind of emotion regulation strategy. When you haven't learned ways to calm yourself down, other ways you often resort to eating. But for children who've been abused and neglected, often it's a survival mechanism as well. You're not quite sure when there'll be food in the house again. Food availability might be unpredictable, so you start to engage in things like hoarding behavior. So these sort of behaviors become learned. They provide a sense of safety in these unsafe environments. But when you kind of see these children in safe environments like schools or say foster homes, they continue to engage in these behaviors every time they feel unsafe, because hoarding food or gorging themselves often brings with it a sense of safety and control that they may not necessarily have in their lives. The act of actually seeking out food and being fed and sharing food itself, it's a form of connection seeking and seeking comfort from others. So often you will find kids who want to kind of emotionally connect with trusted adults but don't know how to, may kind of resort to asking for food or stealing food or having lots of discussions and battles over food with the people who are kind of caring for them. So obviously that has lots of implications in terms of activity, sedentary behavior, sleep pattern, a whole heap of things. But that's just a quick snapshot for you of what that might be like for kids who are traumatized. So let's look at some strategies in terms of helping students who are hungry. The first strategy is just being attuned to signs of hunger in students. So an easy acronym to remember when it comes to thinking about the functions of why a student might not be motivated or completing work is HALT. That's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. HALT. So hunger is often the leading cause of poor behavior and functioning. And just even inquiring with students about how much they've eaten or if they're hungry. Hungry students are irritable, they're distractible, they're fatigued, they're preoccupied. You sort of start to see this sort of pattern in students, inquiring to check in on how much they're getting to eat. And then if there's a consistent pattern of them not getting a lot of food, referring the family to some support people within the school community who can link them up with some welfare services, or people who can advocate for the child to be in a safe and secure and environment where they're getting predictable meals. So there's a whole lot of research to support the role of breakfast clubs, which is essentially providing free breakfast for kids in school. So there's been lots of research to suggest its academic and social and emotional kind of implications for students in school. So Aldofus and colleagues conducted a meta-analysis of the positive effects of breakfast clubs on school functioning, I'm sorry. So the study found that several research papers have identified children who have been supported through the provision of free breakfast at school displayed increased on-task behavior. And the clearest effects, in fact, they found was in completed work related to mathematics and arithmetic. So breakfast clubs programs with the greatest varieties of food have also been found to have the most gains for students. And giving them a wide variety of things to choose from, and they found that this is beneficial for students even when you control for factors such as socioeconomic status. So even for poor students, we controlling for their level of poverty, we see that having a greater variety of food as part of your breakfast club is beneficial. Let's just take a closer look at breakfast clubs in general. So there's been sort of varying levels of success, and some of the problems people have often faced is summarized here in the Salter Mitchell report about, some students are embarrassed. I think there's a great level of shame associated with having to come in early. You're often ostracized for needing to access the breakfast club. Often it's far too early as well. So a lot of these students' morning routines are quite difficult, and their parents might be struggling to get there on time. They might have disrupted sleep. So it's probably kind of difficult for them to make it early enough to access the free breakfast club. So what can you do about it? So there's lots of options here, but one of the kind of few suggestions are to bring that kind of first break in school a bit early and offer the breakfast or like a morning tea kind of meal for the students as well. And other kind of suggestions are moving the breakfast into the classroom where students can kind of access food in a sort of food trolley type of model, so that there is no shame kind of associated with it and everyone has access to the food. And that everyone's energized and fed and ready to learn. The third strategy is about kind of using meal times to build trust and connection. So meal times, historically, evolutionarily, are a time when we socialize and, can communicate pro-social kind of behavior. And there's been a lot of research to suggest dinner times, family dinner times, and it's becoming rarer and rarer among families. Children who have meals with their families that are uninterrupted by television and other things actually have better social, emotional outcomes, but also academic outcomes, surprisingly. And so, as you can see here from that research by DeBaca, childhood shared meal frequencies correspond to high pro-sociality scores. So there's a lot that happens over meal times, lots of chat about the day, opportunities for connection, and these are great opportunities for teachers to build some of that trust in a kind of safe and caring environment. But actually, by sharing food, also communicating care and interest in the child. Finally, it's education about nutrition and eating. So what we know about children who've been traumatized is that often they haven't been exposed to very basic things, basic kind of information about nutrition and healthy eating, and just it might seem really basic, giving kids information about vegetables and fruit and frequency of eating and things like that. But it makes a huge difference for these kids to hear these things, and often for some of them it might be the very first time they hear it. It should be said that there's quite limited evidence in terms of success in terms of educational strategies in changing eating habits for children, and that primarily comes out of the obesity kind of research looking at changing children and families kind of ways of eating and diets and things like that. But having said that, it is still useful in introducing concepts of health and eating for some children. Finally, it's an opportunity to discuss, things about nutrition, eating, and mental health, and how like closely related they all are. And for kids, particularly traumatized kids, meal times might be a time that is tense, that is full of pressure, that is full of unpredictability, especially dinner times later in the night. It might be a time of greater kind of violence or kind of conflict in the house. So really, there are lots of missed opportunities there to really think about what it represents for people and how important it is for us all to be happy and healthy. So it's a great opportunity to be able to do that within the school environment. That's it for this time. I hope you found that useful. Kay should be back next time. If you want more information about the references and resources, visit tipbs.com and check out our blog. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.